The Boeing 737 shuddered through another pocket of turbulence at 37,000 feet, somewhere over the Nevada desert. Passenger 127 sat in 14C, her worn leather jacket draped over faded jeans, nursing a black coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. To the businessman beside her, she was just another tired traveler heading to Los Angeles. To the flight attendants, she was the quiet woman who'd politely declined the meal service and hadn't looked up from her dog-eared paperback once during the 3-hour flight from Denver. What none of them knew was that Lieutenant Colonel Maverick Ghost Castellanos was calculating wind vectors in her head, automatically nodding the slight list to starboard that suggested a minor hydraulic issue, and instinctively cataloging every sound the aircraft made. Old habits from 2 decades of military aviation died hard, even in civilian clothes at cruising altitude. The mystery began with a crackling transmission that shouldn't have existed. "Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is Raptor 27 declaring emergency. We have total electrical failure. Repeat, total electrical failure. GPS down, communications intermittent. Request immediate assistance from any station, any station." Ghost's head snapped up. The voice bleeding through the aircraft's entertainment system was young, male, and barely controlled panic wrapped in military training. Around her, passengers continued their conversations, oblivious to the life-or-death drama playing out in the frequency bands above their heads. The captain's voice came over the intercom seconds later, calm and professional. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some minor radio interference. Nothing to be concerned about." But Ghost was already concerned. Raptor 27 meant F-22, and if an F-22 Raptor was declaring emergency over civilian airspace with complete electrical failure, something had gone catastrophically wrong. She closed her eyes, listening to the static-laden transmissions filtering through the aircraft's poorly shielded electronics. "Raptor 27, this is Nellie's tower. We're not showing you on radar. State your position and nature of emergency." Nellie's were approximately, "Christ, I don't know, Jenny, talk to me. What have you got?" Ghost's blood ran cold. Jenny. There was only one Jenny flying F-22s out of Nellie's, and if Captain Jennifer Viper Chen was in trouble, it meant both birds were down. A 2-ship formation declaring simultaneous electrical failure was either an unprecedented systems failure or something far worse. She reached for the call button, then hesitated. The last thing she wanted was to draw attention to herself. Ghost had retired from active duty 6 months ago after a career that had earned her more commendations than friends and more enemies than she cared to count. She was passenger 127 now, not Lieutenant Colonel Castellanos. She was nobody special, heading to Los Angeles for her sister's wedding, carrying nothing more dangerous than a paperback thriller and old memories. The radio crackled again. Any station, this is Raptor 27. We are 2 souls on board, flying blind, fuel critical. We need help." Ghost closed her eyes and reached for the call button. The flight attendant who responded to Ghost's call button wore the practiced smile of someone who dealt with nervous flyers 1,000 times before. Her name tag read, Sandra, and she leaned down with the patient expression reserved for passengers who needed extra reassurance during turbulence. "Is everything all right, ma'am? Can I get you something to drink?" Ghost kept her voice low, conscious of the businessman beside her who was now eyeing her with mild curiosity. "I need to speak with your captain immediately. It's regarding the radio traffic you're receiving." Sandra's smile faltered slightly. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but passengers aren't allowed in the cockpit during flight, if you're concerned about the turbulence." 2 F-22 Raptors are declaring emergency somewhere in this airspace," Ghost interrupted quietly. "They have complete electrical failure and are flying blind. Your aircraft is probably the only civilian plane in range with working communications." The flight attendant's expression shifted from polite confusion to concern. She glanced around the cabin, then back at Ghost. "Ma'am, I'm not sure what you think you heard, but Raptor 27 and Raptor 28, 2 souls each, fuel critical, GPS down, communications intermittent. Ghost's voice carried the crisp authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Your entertainment system is picking up their emergency frequency because of poor shielding. In about 3 minutes, they're going to start broadcasting on guard frequency, which means every aircraft in the Southwest is going to hear them calling for help. Sandra straightened, her training kicking in. She'd worked for the airline long enough to recognize the difference between a passenger having anxiety and someone who clearly knew what they were talking about. What? What do you need me to tell the captain? Tell him Lieutenant Colonel Maverick Castellanos needs to speak with him immediately. Tell him I'm retired Air Force, and I may be the only person on this aircraft qualified to help those pilots. As Sandra hurried toward the cockpit, Ghost could feel the weight of stares from nearby passengers. The businessman had definitely heard her mention military rank, and the elderly couple across the aisle were whispering behind their hands. She'd blown her cover, but there was no choice. Somewhere out there in the empty sky, 2 of the world's most advanced fighter aircraft were flying blind, and their pilots were running out of time. The radio crackled again, and this time the desperation was unmistakable. Mayday, mayday. Raptor 27, we're down to bingo fuel. Jenny, I'm going to try cycling the backup generator one more time. Ghost closed her eyes and listened to the sound of 2 young pilots facing the possibility that they might not make it home. She'd been there before, in different aircraft over different terrain, but the fear was universal. The knowledge that training and skill and experience might not be enough. The weight of knowing that somewhere, people who loved you were going about their ordinary day, unaware that everything was about to change. The cockpit door opened, and Sandra emerged with Captain Williams, a silver-haired veteran who moved with the deliberate pace of someone who'd been flying commercial aircraft for 30 years. He approached Ghost's row with the expression of a man trying to determine whether he was dealing with a helpful expert or a dangerous lunatic. Ma'am, I understand you have some concerns about radio traffic. Ghost had been flying military aircraft since she was 22 years old. She'd logged over 4,000 hours in everything from trainers to fighters to heavy transport, had survived 3 combat deployments and more emergency landings than she cared to remember. But sitting in that cramped airline seat, she felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like an old flight jacket. Captain Williams slid into the empty seat across the aisle, his expression serious but skeptical. The elderly couple had been relocated to first class, giving them a small bubble of privacy in the crowded cabin. Sandra stood nearby, her hand resting on the seat back as she monitored the situation. Lieutenant Colonel, is it? Williams kept his voice low. I've been flying for 31 years, and I've never heard military traffic bleeding through our entertainment system. Ghost pulled out her wallet and handed him her military ID, the one she technically should have turned in 6 months ago, but hadn't quite been able to part with. The photograph showed a younger woman with the same dark eyes but fewer lines around them, wearing dress blues with an impressive array of ribbons. Williams studied the ID, then looked at her with new respect. Maverick Castellanos, I've heard that call sign before. I doubt it, I kept a low profile. The ghost of Kandahar, the pilot who brought back a damaged C-130 with half the wing gone. Williams handed back the ID. Ma'am, every pilot worth his salt knows that story. They say you flew that bird on instruments and prayer for 200 miles with no hydraulics. Ghost felt heat rise in her cheeks. She hated when that story came up. That was a long time ago. Right now, we need to focus on those Raptors. As if summoned by her words, the radio crackled again. Any station, this is Raptor 27 on guard frequency. We have 2 F-22s, total electrical failure, fuel critical. We're somewhere over the Nevada test range, flying blind. We need immediate assistance. Williams' expression hardened. Jesus, how are you picking this up? Your entertainment system shares some frequencies with aviation bands. Poor shielding, probably to save weight and cost. The signal's weak, but it's there. Ghost leaned forward. Captain, those pilots have maybe 20 minutes of fuel left, and they're flying the most expensive fighters in the world completely blind. If they go down in the desert, what do you need? Ghost felt something she hadn't experienced in months, the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with a mission. I need to talk to them. Your radio can transmit on their frequency if we adjust it properly, and I need to see your navigation display. Williams nodded curtly to Sandra, who immediately began clearing passengers from the seats around them. Within minutes, Ghost found herself following the captain toward the cockpit, acutely aware of the stares and whispered conversations trailing in her wake. The businessman from 14D had his phone out, probably texting someone about the military drama unfolding at altitude. The cockpit of the Boeing 737 felt cramped after years in military aircraft, but familiar in the way that all cockpits were familiar to someone who'd spent 2 decades reading instruments and managing systems. First Officer Martinez, a compact man with intelligent eyes, looked up from his checklist as they entered. Dave, this is Lieutenant Colonel Castellanos. She's going to help us assist some military aircraft in distress. Ghost settled into the jump seat behind the captain's position and immediately began studying the navigation display. The GPS showed their position over the vast emptiness of central Nevada, surrounded by restricted airspace and military operating areas. If the F-22s were out there somewhere, flying blind with failing fuel, their options were limited and none of them were good. The radio crackled again, and this time the voice was different, female, younger, fighting to maintain composure. Raptor 27, this is 28. Mark, I'm showing fuel at 15 minutes. We need to find somewhere to put down now. Ghost reached for the radio microphone, then hesitated. Once she started talking, there would be no hiding who she was or what she'd done. The ghost of Kandahar would be back in the game, whether she wanted it or not. She keyed the mic. Raptor 27 and 28, this is Ghost, monitoring guard frequency from civilian aircraft overhead. What's your status? The silence that followed felt like forever. Then crackling through the static, Ghost, ma'am, is that really you? Ghost felt something twist in her chest. The voice belonged to someone young, someone who'd heard stories and legends but never expected to encounter them at 37,000 feet over the Nevada desert. Someone who was probably about the same age she'd been when she was earning those stories. That's affirmative, Raptor Flight. What's your situation? Ma'am, this is Captain Mark Stevens, Raptor 27. We have 2 F-22s, total electrical failure on both birds. No GPS, no radio except emergency backup, fuel critical. We've been flying blind for 20 minutes. Ghost closed her eyes, calculating. 2 F-22s didn't just suffer simultaneous electrical failure by coincidence. Something had happened, electromagnetic pulse, cyber attack, or system failure that affected both aircraft. Whatever it was, these pilots were in serious trouble. Raptor Flight, this is Ghost. I need you to give me everything you remember about your flight path since the electrical failure. Start with your last known position and heading. Ghost, we were inbound to Nelly's from the north, approximately 100 miles out, heading 180. We just finished a training mission over the Fallen Range when everything went dark. That was static then, 23 minutes ago. Ghost grabbed the captain's chart and began calculating. If they'd been inbound from Fallen, flying south toward Nelly's at typical F-22 cruise speed, they could be anywhere in a 100-square-mile area. With no GPS and no way to navigate except by dead reckoning, they were essentially lost in one of the most desolate areas of the continental United States. 28, this is Ghost. I need your fuel status and any visual references you can give me. Ghost, this is Captain Jennifer Chen. Fuel at 14 minutes, maybe less. We're above solid overcast, no visual reference to the ground. We've been trying to maintain heading 180, but with no instruments." Her voice trailed off, and Ghost could hear the unspoken truth. They were flying blind in aircraft that cost more than most people's houses, and they were about to run out of fuel over some of the most unforgiving terrain in North America. Ghost keyed the mic again. "Raptor Flight, this is Ghost. I'm going to get you home, but I need you to trust me and do exactly what I tell you. Can you do that?" "Yes, ma'am," came the immediate response from both pilots. Captain Williams leaned over. "Colonel, what's your plan?" Ghost was already working the problem, her mind falling back into the familiar patterns of tactical flight planning that had kept her alive through 20 years of military aviation. "We're going to become their eyes and ears. This 737 has GPS, weather radar, and communications. We can guide them to Nellie's. And if we can't?" Ghost looked at the fuel calculations she'd been scribbling on the back of an approach plate. "Then we find them somewhere else to land. Anywhere else." The next few minutes transformed the commercial airliner into an improvised air traffic control center. Captain Williams coordinated with air traffic control to clear surrounding airspace, while First Officer Martinez monitored weather and traffic. Ghost worked the radio, establishing a communication rhythm with the two F-22 pilots that felt as natural as breathing. "Raptor Flight, this is Ghost. I'm showing weather clear below you with scattered clouds at 8,000 feet. Your current position is approximately 40 nautical miles northwest of Nellie's Air Force Base. I'm going to give you a heading that will take you direct to the field." Ghost 27. "We're willing to try, but ma'am, we have no way to maintain heading without instruments. We've been flying by the seat of our pants." Ghost smiled grimly. Flying by the seat of your pants was something she understood better than most. 27. "I'm going to talk you through a technique we used in Afghanistan when we had to fly in GPS-denied environments. It's called tactical dead reckoning, and it's going to require absolute trust between us." She paused, remembering the first time she'd had to guide another aircraft using only voice communication and mathematical calculations. It had been over the Hindu Kush Mountains, with a damaged medevac helicopter carrying wounded Marines, and she'd been flying a C-130 with a partially disabled navigation system. The principle was the same: use basic aircraft performance, wind calculations, and constant communication to maintain course and distance. "Raptor Flight, I need you to execute a gentle left turn to heading 150. Turn rate of 3 degrees per second, standard rate. On my mark. Mark. 27, turning left to 150. 28, same heading. Stay in formation but give yourselves plenty of separation in case we need to maneuver." Ghost watched the navigation display, calculating their probable position based on time and heading. The F-22s should be somewhere ahead and to the right, invisible above the cloud layer, but hopefully close enough to the civilian airliner to maintain reliable radio communication. "Ghost, this is 27. We're established on 150, but I've got to tell you, ma'am, we're down to about 10 minutes of fuel. If this doesn't work." "It's going to work, 27. I've done this before." Ghost's voice carried absolute conviction, even though she was calculating contingencies in her head. 10 minutes of fuel in an F-22 meant they had to be on the ground or preparing for ejection in less than 8 minutes. There was no margin for error. "Raptor Flight, this is Ghost. I'm going to start a descent to get you below the clouds where you can see the ground. We'll use visual references to guide you to Nellie's." Captain Williams caught her attention and pointed to his weather radar display. The scattered clouds Ghost had mentioned were thicker than expected, and the ceiling was lower than forecast. If the F-22s descended below the clouds, they might find themselves in instrument meteorological conditions with no instruments, a potentially fatal situation. Ghost keyed the mic. "Raptor Flight, stand by on the descent. I'm reassessing weather conditions." She studied the display, her mind racing through alternatives. Dead reckoning would only work for so long, and with fuel running critical, they needed a solution that would get the F-22s on the ground in the next few minutes. Nellie's was still their best option, but the weather wasn't cooperating. Then she had an idea that was either brilliant or insane. "Captain Williams, can you contact Nellie's tower directly on their frequency?" "Absolutely. What do you have in mind?" Ghost was already reaching for the radio. "We're going to use this aircraft as a flying navigation beacon. If we can establish communication with Nellie's tower and coordinate our position, we can guide the F-22s directly to us, then hand them off to tower control for the approach." Williams nodded grimly. "It might work, but if those Raptors are flying blind and low on fuel, then we'd better make sure it works the first time." The plan was audacious in its simplicity and terrifying in its execution. The Boeing 737 would descend to 20,000 feet and establish a holding pattern directly on the approach path to Nellie's Air Force Base. The F-22s would navigate to the airliner's position using radio bearings and time calculations, then follow them down through the clouds to the runway. It required precise coordination between three aircraft, perfect timing, and more than a little luck. Captain Williams was already coordinating with air traffic control, his voice professional and calm despite the stakes. "Nellie's Tower, this is Southwest 4725. We have emergency military traffic, 2 F-22s with electrical failure and fuel critical. Request immediate priority handling for emergency descent and approach guidance." The tower controller's response came immediately. "Southwest 4725, Nellie's Tower. Understand you have emergency military traffic. All aircraft are cleared from the area. You are cleared to descend to flight level 200 and establish holding pattern on the ILS approach to runway 21 left. Emergency equipment is being positioned." Ghost felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders as the 737 began its descent. She was no longer passenger 127. She was back in her element, managing a crisis in 3 dimensions with lives hanging in the balance. The difference was that this time, she wasn't just responsible for her own aircraft. She was guiding 2 of the most advanced fighters in the world to safety using nothing more than radio communication and 20 years of experience. "Raptor Flight, this is Ghost. We're beginning descent to 20,000 feet and will establish a holding pattern on the approach to Nellie's. I need you to fly heading 140 for 3 minutes, then turn right to heading 200. This will put you on an intercept course with our position." Ghost 27, fuel at 6 minutes. We're going to need this to work the first time. Roger 27, it will work, trust me. Ghost wished she felt as confident as she sounded. The calculations were solid, but there were so many variables: wind drift, timing errors, communication delays, fuel consumption rates. Any one of them could throw off the intercept and send the F-22s past their recovery point. 28, how are you holding up over there? Ghost, this is Chen. Hanging in there, ma'am. Got to say, it's an honor to fly with the Ghost of Kandahar, even under these circumstances. Ghost felt heat rise in her cheeks. Even now, with fuel running critical and visibility near zero, the legend followed her. Save the compliments for when we're all on the ground, 28. The 737 leveled off at 20,000 feet, and Captain Williams began the turn into the holding pattern. Ghost could see Nellie's Air Force Base through breaks in the clouds below, runways and hangars, and the familiar geometry of a military installation laid out in the desert. It looked impossibly small from this altitude, but it was home for the 2 pilots flying blind somewhere above them. Raptor Flight, this is Ghost. Execute your turn to heading 200 now. Time from turn to intercept should be approximately 4 minutes. 27 turning right to 200. 28 same heading. Ghost, I'm showing fuel at 4 minutes. This is going to be close. 4 minutes of fuel, meant the F-22s had to be on final approach to Nellies in less than 2 minutes, or they would be facing ejection over the desert. Ghost closed her eyes and ran the calculations one more time, double-checking her math against the navigation display and the stopwatch she'd started when the fighters began their turn. Ghost, this is 2-7. We should be approaching your position, but we're still in solid clouds. No visual contact. Ghost's heart sank. If the F-22s couldn't see the 737, the intercept wouldn't work. They needed visual contact to establish relative position and begin the approach to Nellies. Then First Officer Martinez spoke up. "Colonel, what if we turn on our landing lights? They might be able to see us through the clouds." It was a brilliant suggestion. Ghost immediately keyed the mic. "Captain Williams, can you turn on all exterior lights? Landing lights, strobes, everything." Williams flipped switches rapidly, and the 737 became a flying Christmas tree, every light blazing against the gray clouds. "Raptor Flight, this is Ghost. We've turned on all exterior lighting. Look for a civilian airliner with full lights at your 11 o'clock position, approximately 2 miles." Seconds ticked by. Ghost could hear her own heartbeat over the radio static. Then, "Ghost, this is 2-7. Contact. I have you at 11 o'clock, slightly low. Jenny, do you see them?" 2-8 has contact. "Ghost, you're a beautiful sight." Ghost felt relief wash over her like cool water. They'd found each other in the vast sky, 2 F-22 Raptors and a civilian airliner connected by radio waves and professional trust. But they weren't home yet. "Raptor Flight, this is Ghost. Follow me down. I'm going to fly the ILS approach to runway 21 left at Nellies. Stay in formation on my left side, but give yourselves room to maneuver. When I call the runway in sight, you'll break off for individual approaches." The descent through the clouds felt like traveling through gray cotton, with visibility near zero and turbulence that rattled the 737's frame. Ghost monitored the radio chatter between the F-22 pilots, hearing the strain in their voices as they fought to maintain formation while managing fuel-critical aircraft with no instruments. "Ghost 2-7, fuel at 2 minutes. We need to see that runway soon." "Roger 2-7, we're almost there." Ghost watched the altimeter unwind. 15,000, 10,000, 8,000 feet. The clouds should be breaking soon, and when they did, she would need to spot the runway immediately and guide the F-22s to individual approaches before their fuel ran out completely. 7,000 feet, still solid clouds. 6,000 feet, a brief break, then more gray. 5,000 feet, and suddenly the world opened up below them. The Nevada desert stretched out in all directions, brown and barren under the afternoon sun. And there, directly ahead, was Nellies Air Force Base. Runways laid out in a precise geometric pattern, with emergency vehicles lined up along the approach path like tiny red and white toys. "Raptor Flight, runway in sight, 12 o'clock, 5 miles. You are cleared for individual approaches, emergency equipment standing by. 2-7, take the left runway. 2-8, you've got the right runway." "Ghost, this is 2-7, we see it. Ma'am, I can't thank you enough." "Thank me when you're on the ground, 2-7. Now fly those airplanes." Ghost watched through the cockpit windows as 2 gray shapes detached themselves from formation and began their approaches to Nellies. The F-22 Raptors looked impossibly graceful even in distress, their angular silhouettes cutting through the afternoon sky like arrows aimed at home. 2-7 is on final, gear down, fuel at 1 minute. 2-8 on final approach, right runway, fuel critical. Captain Williams had pulled the 737 into a gentle orbit over the base, giving them a grandstand view of the emergency landings below. Ghost found herself holding her breath as the 2 fighters touched down simultaneously on parallel runways, their drag chutes deploying like white flowers against the desert background. "Raptor 2-7, safe on deck. 2-8 on the ground and rolling." Ghost closed her eyes and felt 20 years of tension drain out of her shoulders. 2 more pilots were going home tonight. 2 more aircraft had been saved. The mission was complete. Captain Williams turned to her with an expression of profound respect. "Colonel, that was the most incredible piece of flying I've ever witnessed. Those pilots owe you their lives." Ghost shook her head. "They did the hard part. Flying blind in a fighter takes more courage than I'll ever have." As the 737 resumed course toward Los Angeles, Ghost settled back into the jump seat and watched the desert scroll past below. The emergency was over, the crisis resolved, but she knew her life had just changed irrevocably. Word would get out about what had happened today. The ghost of Kandahar was back in the headlines, whether she wanted it or not. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Colonel Castellanos, this is Captain Stevens. When we land, there are some people who would very much like to meet you. The Air Force has a proposition." Ghost stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. She'd spent 6 months trying to build a civilian life, trying to forget the weight of command and the burden of other people's lives. But today had reminded her of something she tried to forget. She was good at this. Better than good. And there were still pilots out there who needed what she could give them. She closed her eyes and tried to imagine her sister's wedding in Los Angeles, tried to picture herself in a bridesmaid's dress making small talk with relatives. The image felt surreal, like trying to imagine herself in someone else's life. Captain Williams appeared beside her as the 737 leveled off at cruising altitude. "Colonel, I don't know what you were planning to do in Los Angeles, but I have a feeling your plans just changed." Ghost looked out the window at the endless sky, thinking about 2 young pilots who were probably calling their families right now, telling them they were safe. "Yeah," she said quietly, "I think you're right." The Boeing 737 continued west toward Los Angeles, carrying passenger 127 toward a future she hadn't expected, and a destiny she was no longer sure she could avoid. Behind them, the Nevada desert stretched out like a brown carpet, holding its secrets close. But somewhere in that vast emptiness, 2 F-22 Raptors sat on a runway at Nellis Air Force Base, their pilots alive and their missions complete, thanks to a woman who had tried to retire from being a hero. The legend of the Ghost of Kandahar was about to begin a new chapter. Ghost spent the remainder of the flight to Los Angeles staring out the window, watching the landscape change from Nevada desert to California mountains, to the sprawling urban maze of the Los Angeles basin. The other passengers had returned to their seats, their conversations and entertainment, their ordinary lives uninterrupted by the drama that had played out at 37,000 feet. But Ghost couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed in those 20 minutes over the Nevada desert. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Captain Stevens. "Colonel, the Air Force wants to discuss a consulting position. Emergency response training for pilots facing GPS-denied environments. Your expertise could save lives." This time, she didn't delete the message. Captain Williams found her during the final approach to LAX, sliding into the empty seat beside her with the easy familiarity of someone who had shared an extraordinary experience. "You know, in 31 years of flying, I've never been part of anything like that." Ghost managed a small smile. "You did good up there, Captain. Those pilots are alive because you were willing to take risks." "They're alive because of you." Williams paused, studying her profile. "Can I ask you something? Why did you retire? Someone with your skills, your experience, the Air Force must have tried to keep you." Ghost was quiet for a long moment, watching the city lights spread out below them like stars scattered across black velvet. "Sometimes the cost gets too high," she said finally. 20 years of combat missions, emergency rescues, impossible situations. You save lives, but you also carry the weight of every decision, every risk, every time you can't save everyone. But today, you did save everyone. Today I got lucky." Ghost turned to look at him. Two young pilots trusted a voice on the radio and it worked out. But what if it hadn't? What if my calculations were wrong? What if the weather didn't cooperate? What if they'd run out of fuel 30 seconds before they found the runway? Williams nodded slowly. That's the burden of command, isn't it? Always knowing that people's lives depend on your decisions. That's part of it. The other part is knowing that eventually your luck runs out. Everyone's does. I wanted to retire while I was still ahead. The 737 touched down at Lax with barely a bump, and as the aircraft taxied toward the gate, Ghost felt the familiar sensation of returning to Earth after a mission. But this time was different. This time, she wasn't sure she was ready to put the mission behind her. Her phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. She answered without thinking. Castellanos. Colonel, this is General Patricia Morrison, Air Force Personnel Center. I believe you've had an interesting flight today. Ghost closed her eyes. Word traveled fast in the military, especially when it involved F-22s and emergency situations. General, I'm retired. So I understand. Colonel, we have a problem. GPS-denied environments are becoming more common in contested airspace. Our pilots need training in the kind of emergency navigation techniques you demonstrated today. We need someone with your expertise to develop curriculum and training programs. I appreciate the offer, General, but before you say no, let me ask you something. How did it feel today, when those pilots needed help, when you were the only person who could guide them home? Ghost was quiet, remembering the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders, the familiar surge of adrenaline as she calculated courses and headings, the overwhelming relief when both F-22s touched down safely. It felt like home, she admitted. Then come home, Colonel. The Air Force needs you. Those two pilots who landed safely at Nelly's need you, and every pilot who might face a similar emergency in the future needs you. Ghost stared out the window at the Los Angeles terminal, at the ordinary people going about their ordinary lives. Her sister's wedding was tomorrow. She had a bridesmaid's dress hanging in a hotel closet and a speech prepared for the reception. She had tried to build a civilian life, tried to be someone other than the ghost of Kandahar. But today had reminded her of who she really was. General, I'll need to think about it. Of course, but don't think too long, Colonel. Captain Stevens and Captain Chen are going to be at the Pentagon next week, briefing senior leadership on what happened today. They specifically requested that you be there. After General Morrison hung up, Ghost sat in the empty aircraft, listening to the sounds of the cleaning crew preparing for the next flight. Captain Williams appeared in the doorway of the cockpit, his uniform jacket slung over his shoulder. So, he asked. So what? So are you going back? Ghost stood and retrieved her carry-on bag from the overhead compartment, the same worn leather bag she'd carried on 100 military flights. I don't know. 6 months ago, I thought I was done. I thought I'd given enough. And now? Ghost thought about Captain Stevens and Captain Chen, two young pilots who had trusted her voice when everything else failed. She thought about all the other pilots out there, flying increasingly sophisticated aircraft into increasingly dangerous situations, often without the kind of backup and support that had kept her alive through 20 years of military aviation. Now I'm not so sure. Williams nodded. For what it's worth, Colonel, I think you know what you need to do. You just haven't admitted it to yourself yet. Ghost walked off the aircraft into the controlled chaos of Lax, her mind still partly in the sky over Nevada, still calculating headings and fuel consumption, and the countless variables that determined whether people lived or died. Her sister's wedding was tomorrow, but she found herself thinking about Monday morning, about two young pilots who would be briefing senior leadership on their emergency, about the gaps in training and doctrine that had nearly cost them their lives. She pulled out her phone and scrolled to General Morrison's number, her thumb hovering over the call button. Then she put the phone away and headed for the rental car counter. Some decisions couldn't be rushed, even when you already knew what the answer would be. But as she drove through the Los Angeles traffic toward her hotel, Ghost found herself humming an old song she hadn't thought about in years, a song about coming home. The ghost of Kandahar was about to make her comeback, and this time she was going to do it on her own terms. The wedding reception was everything Ghost's sister Emma had dreamed of: elegant, romantic, and filled with the kind of joy that came from two people who had found their perfect match. Ghost stood at the head table in her bridesmaid's dress, a flowing blue creation that felt strange after months of civilian clothes and years of military uniforms. She'd given her speech, something heartfelt about love and commitment and the courage to trust someone with your heart. But her mind kept drifting to events 37,000 feet above the Nevada desert. Emma appeared beside,